We're going to turn now, we're going to talk about the United States and its role and how it expects its military to be engaged. Let's put this up there on the screen. This is from the Wall Street Journal. And this is a little bit of a conundrum. It's a difficult headline to work through. But as we come through some of the reporting, I think it'll all begin to make sense. They say that Israel agrees to delay Gaza invasion to allow U.S. to prepare defenses. So the subtext really of the article is that the United States, and we brought you the discrete numbers, but we have sent now thousands of American troops and service members directly to the region. On top of that, we have surged 2 carrier strike groups costing, who knows, untold amounts of billions firepower to the region. On top of that, we sent one of our most sophisticated anti-missile defense systems to the region, the THAAD missile battery. On top of that, we also sent extra Patriot batteries. You don't do any of this if you expect to fight Hezbollah. You especially don't do this if you expect to fight Hamas. You only do this if you expect to fight a advanced conventional military force, where there is only one that could potentially be involved in this, and that's called Iran. They are almost certain at this point that something is going to pop off. Now, is it going to be with the actual sovereign nation of Iran, or is it going to be with Iranian proxies? On the proxy front, we are already in a military combat situation with them. We just don't even want to admit it. Let's put this up there on the screen. The Pentagon has now admitted and held this information from us for days until it was leaked privately to journalists. 24 U.S. troops have now been injured in attacks since the Gaza war began. The Biden administration has, they say, withheld these details about these incidents for days, even though they acknowledge that service members are under a heightened risk. And Krystal, just overnight, another U.S. base in Syria was attacked. Of course, it bears the question of why do we have 1,000 people in Syria?
Yeah,
but my big one would be, if we're gonna have 1,000 people, can we make sure that these people are safe? I mean, they're under, at this point, bombardment from drones, from rockets, and in some cases from missiles from God knows where. Are we sure that we have the requisite capabilities and stuff to deter that? Because what we're really learning is how vulnerable our people are. And these are in Iraq and in Syria. I, again, have not even mentioned the thousands of troops in Bahrain, the people in Kuwait, the people in Doha. I mean, we have soldiers all over the place in the Middle East and bases, which 2 weeks ago, they were hanging out and they had no clue that any of this was going to happen. And now they're on a footing where they could be attacked at any moment. So this is really scary stuff with the carrier group. And again, we've already had the USS Carney, the guided missile destroyer, which had hours-long engagement shooting down freaking cruise missiles coming out of Yemen, allegedly being headed over to Israel. All signs, Krystal, point to U.S. military engagement right now in the Middle East. The only question is will it evolve into a full-blown war with Iran or not? And I honestly don't know. I think it's genuinely think it's a coin toss at this point, considering what's going to happen.
Yeah, especially just given the belligerence from the Netanyahu government, you know, his framing and belief that this is some sort of a holy war. You certainly have elements of that here within the U.S. Political class as well. Lindsey Graham coming out and saying the same thing. You know, I do think the Biden administration realizes how catastrophic it would be to get into a direct war with Iran. You know, we brought you the graphic from what's his name who runs the border with our guest today?
Daryl Cooper.
Daryl, yeah, I want to call him Brett. Yeah. Daryl Cooper. About how, look, we're talking about like a draft. We're talking about massive regional, I mean, you are talking about World War III when you're talking about war with Iran and along religious, like holy war lines. This is a catastrophe. So I do believe that the Biden administration knows this would not be a good thing. They're not that dumb, but that doesn't mean that we won't end up there. There's a reason why they've tried to downplay, and I actually sort of appreciate it, tried to downplay the attacks on our troops in the region. First of all, it does raise the question among many Americans of like, wait, why are we there anyway? Like, did I agree? What are our troops doing in these areas at this point anyway? So there's that. But also because they are very worried about the way that public sentiment, by the way that the war drums can start beating, the interest that, by the way, defense contractors are admitting how excited they are about the possibility of a broader war. They're talking about this on earnings call, like, yay, we'll get to make more money. There are a lot of forces beyond just the President of the United States that could push us in this direction. There's a couple other things to say about this possible ground invasion. You mentioned there were, the tanks that went in some kind of a raid overnight to like bulldoze paths and seemingly to ease the path of a ground invasion. You now have had multiple delays effectively at the request of the United States. First, it was, let's work on negotiating on the hostages. Now it's, hey, give us some time to get defenses in the region in case this really pops off and we end up directly engaged. But there is also some indication here that Netanyahu himself is interested in delaying, dragging out, and potentially limiting the ambition and scope of this ultimate ground invasion. So, number one, recall that Netanyahu, before all of this happened, was in serious political jeopardy, facing corruption charges. Israel was, at war with itself in terms of these judicial, quote-unquote, reforms, trying to kneecap the independent judiciary, mass nationwide protests, et cetera. And now he's even under more fire because some 90% of the Israeli public blames him in part for what Hamas was able to perpetrate, for the intelligence failures, for the military failures, et cetera. This is a man who billed himself as, quote unquote, Mr. Security and said that his one and only goal was to keep the Israeli people safe. So you can see how people are feeling about him given the manifest failures of what he said his primary mission was as prime minister. So he has said that there needs to be an inquiry and questions need to be answered even with regard to himself, but he says after the war's over. So he has a major political motivation to drag his feet and drag things out as long as possible. That's number one. Number two, there seem to be some indications that, the American warnings about, hey, you all don't really know what you're getting into here. This is not going to be easy. This is going to be extraordinarily difficult. You have no plan for what comes after. I would argue they actually do have a plan, but you don't seem to know what's going to come next. Do you really know what you're getting yourself into? Combined with the fact that you had these intelligence and security failures on October 7th, could be giving Netanyahu some pause about going all in with the full ground invasion. Now, it's very hard to tell what is real, what is misinformation, what's a feint to try to get, Hamas to let down their guard in Gaza. This is all just speculation, but it is worth noting at this point that this ground invasion has now been delayed and delayed again and could possibly be more limited than the initial full-scale, all-in move that was being signaled early on.
Yeah, this is something I really want to talk about with Daryl on the whenever we talk to him, because he has said before that the IDF's military capability and track record in the more modern wars is not really the gold standard. Yeah, they're good at dropping bombs. In terms of like fighting urban combat, they have a pretty mixed record. So maybe they're realizing some of that. I really think the main thing that's holding any of this back at all is the prospect of a broader war. Not only just pressure from the U.S., but pressure from inside the region. One way we can show people this is a recent interview with Queen Rania of Jordan. Queen Rania, the wife of King Abdullah of Jordan. I mean, this is a figure who's definitely more described as like moderate inside of Jordanian society. And in this interview, she very clearly blames Israel. It also is because inside of Jordan, it's a powder keg. You have a massive Palestinian population. The monarchy itself could be put at risk. But this, I believe, is an instance of the monarchy responding to public sentiment inside of Jordan, which is outraged about the situation in Gaza. Here is a preview of what it looks like in the region and what she said in this interview on CNN.
Equally, I think the people all around the Middle East, including in Jordan, we are just shocked and disappointed by the world's reaction to this catastrophe that is unfolding. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen, a glaring double standard in the world. When October 7th happened, the world immediately and unequivocally stood by Israel and its right to defend itself and condemned the attacks that happened. But what we're seeing the last couple of weeks, we're seeing silence in the world. Countries have stopped at just expressing concern or acknowledging the casualties, but always with a preface of declaration of support for Israel. And, are we being told that it is wrong to kill an entire family at gunpoint, but it's okay to shell them to death? I mean, there is a glaring double standard here. And it is just shocking to the Arab world. This is the first time in modern history that there is such human suffering, and the world is not even calling for a ceasefire. So the silence is deafening, and to many in our region, it makes the Western world complicit, through their support and through the cover that they give Israel, that it is just its right to defend itself. Many in the Arab world are looking at the Western world as not just tolerating this, but as aiding and abetting it.
That is a very clear shot here in Washington. Let me tell you, that lady probably spends more time in Washington than she does back at home, based upon everything I know. Also, though, they want to keep their crown. They know what's going on. That is, in my view, right now, it's funny, the Saudi government, for example, the Saudi government and the monarchy has put out an edict where they're like, hey, stop spreading some of these videos around about what's going on in Gaza. You know why? They don't want the population inflamed. This is one of those situations where I really do not believe that people in the West are at least grappling with the level of like bottom-up rage, which will eventually erupt into something. Who knows what it will look like. That interview is a good example of this lady, her entire government, their whole regime is backstopped by the United States and has been for a long time. So when she's going out there talking about the West and blaming the West, like that is a clear message. Also, it was in English, again, for a reason. It is being
on
very
CNN.
Clearly targeted, agreed to directly to guys like Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, and President Biden, just to be like, hey, just so you know, even your so-called close allies, why do you think her husband canceled the meeting with Biden after, during all of that? While these places may not be democracies, it does not mean that like small d democratic like feeling is not bubbling up to the government. The governments want to survive. That's the story really of every regime in the Middle East. And they know where the power is right now. And if anything, they are a restraining force on their population.
Yeah. There's a lot to say about that. I mean, first of all, it is worth noting she is herself Palestinian, and there are many Palestinian refugees in Jordan. And so, as you say, even, in a place like Jordan or a place in Saudi Arabia, even in a monarchy, they are still concerned about, their own population. She's also correct about the double standard here. She's also correct about how cowardly it is that there's not even an ability to sign on to a resolution for a ceasefire. And to me, the most important part of what she said is how she said multiple times that watching this in the view of the Arab world, the Western world is complicit. That we in the US, and as you said, this is aimed directly at the Biden administration, no doubt about it, that we are complicit, that we are aiding and abetting what is happening there. And so as much as you'd like to keep your liberal, nice internationalism, humanitarian face in the world and all the, beautiful things you said about democracy in Ukraine, et cetera, what is happening on the ground in Gaza will not be forgotten. And that, there is no controlling the rage that it is sparking throughout the region. And really actually uniting a lot of very unlikely countries throughout the region in common cause against what is happening on the ground in Gaza. So it really should be seen as like a warning shot at the U.S. for what's unfolding here. And we're going to talk a little bit about Tony Blinken going to Qatar and trying to get them to rein in what Al Jazeera is doing. And, clearly the U.S. is aware of how damaging these images are and how, volatile the situation is. So, look, this is a powder keg, and it could create total chaos. We're already in a chaotic situation, let's be clear. But that chaos could easily spread and ignite way out of control. And even if the administration, doesn't really want to find itself in a war with Iran, that doesn't mean that is any guarantee against it happening.
No, it's very much on the table right now.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.